It's wild. Grow the fuck up. Hello folks, welcome back to my channel. Today I am doing my September wrap-up, and it is finally cold enough in the apartment that I need to wear a scarf and drink hot tea while I do this. So hopefully I can avoid knocking anything over. Okay. So in September I read 13 books, which is kind of impressive given that I was working for like the first 2.5 weeks. Definitely some of that was helped along by having lots of time to listen to audiobooks and then reading voraciously during all of my lunch breaks. But still, it's interesting that even with, 40 hours a week, I was still able to read that many books. Okay, let's get into it. So the first book, I listened to the audiobook of Laziness Does Not Exist by Devon Price. By Dr. Devon Price. Devon Price uses they, them pronouns and is a trans effeminate writer and academic, and has published this book called Laziness Does Not Exist, and it's narrated by Em Grosland. And this was very short. This was like a 4-hour audiobook or something. It was very short. Very approachable is not the word. Accessible? Maybe accessible is the word I want. So this is a book that describes itself as this book is a full-throated defense of the behaviors that get maligned as laziness and the people who have been written off as lazy by society. So this goes into ableism, neurodivergence, the ways that poverty and racism and other marginalized identity can kind of wear on people and impact a person's ability to be productive, and then also challenging that notion of like a person's value being tied to the productivity. So it is a wonderful anti-capitalist, pro-labor rights, pro-personal boundaries. If I say manifesto, am I gonna sound too extreme? Is that gonna be too many buzzwords? But this book, it's a combination of it, like exploring the origins of the idea of like productivity and laziness in our society, and then also like kind of what to do about it. Like, how do you establish boundaries? How do you fight for better working conditions, etc. It talks about like the laziness lie, basically how the fear of being seen as lazy causes us to compromise our boundaries, our relationships, and our health. The laziness lie has 3 main... I need to not summarize everything because you should just go read it because it's really short. And the narration is good, and the ideas are really valuable. It felt very inclusive. It felt, like, of course, like every, no one person is going to be able to speak for all marginalized identities. But I did feel that this author did a good job of, like, being considerate of the ways that, like, sexism has its own particular impact, and racism and microaggressions have their own particular impact, and ableism definitely. There's a lot of conversations in here about disability and ableism, and if we're starting to see a lot of, I was just hearing something on NPR today about like minimum wage fast food workers and this like rising wave of workers finally having enough of shitty pay and shitty working conditions and feeling completely like unseen and disrespected by their employers. And I work in theater and entertainment, and there's a whole bunch of strikes that are like happening or have been authorized in my industry, just because we're finally at a point where people are like, we've had enough. We've had enough, and you've had your time to improve things and you haven't. It's like there's so much in here that I want to talk about, but also if I talk about it too much, then I basically summarized the whole thing for you, and you really should just go check it out. Okay, then also this month I read Siege and Storm by Leigh Bardugo, and what's it called? Ruin and Rising by Leigh Bardugo. Books 2 and 3 in the Shadow and Bone trilogy. Is that what the trilogy is actually called? the Grishaverse books that follow Alina, whatever that trilogy's called. So in Siege and Storm, book 2, I really liked Alina more as a character. She definitely had more spirit, more backbone. Definitely just, I love that we finally got to see her be fed up at people trying to use her as a pawn. Also, the character of Nikolai is amusing. I see why there's a fandom around him. He was a fun character. He had a lot of, lines that were, very prideful while being self-deprecating at the same time. And he was, very aware of that. He wasn't necessarily comedic, but he was this levity in the face of darkness that, I think did kind of balance the seriousness of their context. So I liked that. And then Ruin and Rising, I think, was probably my favorite of the series because I really liked the exploration of the founding of the religion and mysticism that surrounds Sancta Alina. And I really like that, Alina is not just coming into her power as a Grisha, but coming into her power as a mythic figure. And just she's finally embracing that, there are people who will follow her no matter what, and as much as it makes her uncomfortable to kind of use these bodies as weapons, or being able to weaponize the people who have loyalty to her, she's like, fuck it, we're desperate, we're in a war, I'm gonna use whatever I can. And I think she really finally accepted that, even though this is an influence that she wanted, it's influence that she has, so what the fuck is she gonna do with it? And also, this is, one of my favorite lines when she's, talking to the Apparat. You are on your knees. We are not negotiating. It's ooh, girl. I hate how much awful things have happened to you to bring you here, but I love that you're taking the reins. It's great. So yeah, I enjoyed the series. I think, and also in reading these, it made me want to go back and read the Six of Crows duology because I didn't realize that in terms of timeline, I think this book, or these books come first. So Six of Crows makes a lot of references to characters and things in these books, and I kind of want to go back and reread it now that I have that context. So yeah, it was fun, and I look forward to seeing how the Netflix adaptation adapts these books in the future series. Okay, my heater kicked on and my tea is making me warm, but I don't want to flash you with this tank top, so bare arms it is. Okay. Alright, next book I want to talk about is, I read The Homeward Bounders by Diana Wynne Jones. This was a book on my Amnesia Reads project, and I kind of read this one for Sci-Fi September, because this deals with parallel worlds and dimension hopping, and with that there is some, not quite time travel, but time shifting. It counts as sci-fi. So this follows a kid, Jamie, who gets, basically, he stumbles into the world of them, and they're basically playing, tabletop RPGs, and the worlds that they play are real, and Jamie belongs to one of those worlds, and he kind of, realizes who they are. It's okay, well, now that you realize that's what's going on, you can't continue in that world. You have to become a homeward bounder, who is someone who is bounced around from world to world. And I definitely enjoyed this more than the other Diana Wynne Jones book I read several months ago, which was Hexwood. I thought kind of the powers, or I thought the fantasy elements of this were pretty solid. I thought the technology of the game was interesting. I felt the plot was definitely more cohesive than Hexwood, and I liked the characters. It's interesting. We have a character in here who has a disability. They call it a deformity. She has like a shriveled arm, but it's like magic, and she can kind of make it appear like a normal arm or make it turn into other things. Like she can turn it into like an elephant trunk, or she can turn it into like a flaming sword or something. And it was interesting, just like the way there was this tension with like calling it a deformity or calling it a gift, and like, you know, yes, she can do amazing things with it, but it's also something that like really sets her apart and has kind of caused her to like be torn from her home. And it's this, and it was, I don't think it was meant to be like this huge conversation on like ableism and talking about how do we talk about bodies that look different than the norm. But I think there was something really in there of this tension of, you know, some people are going to view it as a deformity, and some people are going to view it as not a big deal, and some people are going to view it as like this gift, and like it can be an element of all three. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I feel like this was just like a solid 3.5 stars. Next book I read that I was also reading for the Sci-Fi Readathon, fulfilling the steampunk prompt, was Leviathan by Scott Westerfield. This is another amnesia read book for me. This is a middle grade that follows an alternate World War II world where you have the clanker, like the mechanics, what do they call them? The clankers and the Darwinists. So the clankers are like the Germans and the Ottoman Empire in Serbia, and they are very much about mechanical technology, and they have like these big zeppelins and these big like clanker walkers. So they're all about mechanics. And then the Darwinists are Britain and the rest of Western Europe, and they have genetically engineered animals to basically fulfill the role of machines. So they've got like these big flying leviathans, and you know, they've weaponized like bats that eat flechettes, which are like little bit razor blades that basically you fly them out and then you make them poop the razor blades on top of the balloon of a zeppelin to pop it. There's a lot of ideological tension between, you know, people feeling like the genetic altering of these animals is like an affront to God, but then also like, okay, but what about like the environmental impact of the coal and oil that is used to power the machines, and also like the machines can't heal, whereas the animals, if they do get injured or damaged, they can. I wish there had been more conversation about the animals getting injured. There was a little bit, it's like especially at the end, but there's really not much of like an ethical discussion about, okay, but do these creatures have any kind of sentience? How do they feel pain? And how do we deal with the ethical implications of breeding all of these animals to be somewhat expendable, like breeding them to be expendable? It's a middle grade book, so it doesn't really go that deep into it. And then, so that's the world. And the world is quite interesting. Can you tell that I enjoyed rereading this? I should keep holding it up, because also like this cover is gorgeous. This is like all textured embossing. So it follows, it kind of follows like the initiating powder keg events of, is this World War One? No, this is World War One. Sorry, not World War II. World War One, because it deals with the assassination of the what's the title? The Kaiser of Austria? Not Kaiser. The leader of Austria. And we follow his son as he is trying to escape, because he will either be killed so that he doesn't contest the throne, or he will be used as a puppet, or basically he needs to fucking run. And then we are also so that he's on the clanker side, but he's not one of the bad guys. He just comes from the clanker culture. And then on the Darwinist side, we follow a girl who disguises herself as a boy to work as a sailor on one of the flying Leviathan ships. And of course, as a girl, she's not allowed to do that. So we're following their two perspectives, and like towards the end of the book, their perspectives join and they continue on in the next books. So yeah, I thought this was really fun. Okay, moving on. Holy shit, I've talked about like 4 books and I've been filming for half an hour. I've talked about more than 4 books, I think. The next book I read was Saga Volume 1. That's the graphic novel that I don't want to bother getting down off my shelf. Yeah, this was fun. Well, fun is kind of a hard, it's not a great word because there's definitely some tough topics already introduced in this novel. I'd read it once before, and I think I'd read Volume 2, but I don't know if I read much more than that. But I would definitely like to continue with it. Yeah, the artwork is great and the story is interesting, and I think this bind up of Volume 1 does a really great job of setting up the world and giving us a little bit of like historical context, but mostly just like setting up the world that we're in and then introducing us to these very interesting characters. We'll keep that discussion nice and short and move on. The next book I read, I listened to the audiobook of The Angel's Game by Carlo Ruiz Zafón, narrated by Dan Stevens, and this is this translated? Stand by. Yes. This is translated into English by Lucia Gravis. So I didn't realize that this is like a companion novel to The Shadow of the Wind. And like what I've heard is like there's 4 books, and like the first 3 kind of feel like standalone stories, and then they all kind of really come together in the 4th book. So I have not read Shadow of the Wind. I would be interested in reading that one. I liked the audiobook. I found this world to be, this was a very like slow, detailed, macabre kind of murder mystery. I agree with a lot of the critiques that it's really hard to describe what this book is about. We're following a protagonist who wants to be an author. He gets hired to be an author, but under a pen name, and like he's hired to like produce like a weekly serial or something, and like the workload is killing him literally and figuratively. So then he makes a deal with this mysterious character who's got some like paranormal aspects. This is a world that's like, it's like almost paranormal, but it's like, was I just drunk? Was the lighting just bad and it's just a shadow? Like did that person actually die and then come back to life, or was it actually like a mannequin? Like, you know, there's a lot of like questioning of reality that might or might not have a paranormal explanation. So, okay, so he's in this terrible author agreement, and then he makes a deal with this kind of either angelic or devil paranormal figure who makes him an offer that's too good to be true to get him out of this terrible deal and lets him write what he actually wants to write. And then he moves into this house that's got this very mysterious past. Yeah, I liked it. I found it beautiful and literary. And what was that female character's name? Isabella? Yeah. So, and then at one point he gets this kind of like house assistant woman called Isabella, and I really liked her. I thought she had a really good spirit. Yeah, I like that they had this kind of like, not like Sunshine and Grouch relationship, but like Grouch and snappy, witty person who's like, oh my god, eat your dinner and stop like leaving trash everywhere. Like, grow the fuck up. So yeah, I liked her and I liked their relationship. I think part of my confusion and like difficulty in following it was I was listening to it on audiobook, which at work meant sometimes I was picking it up and putting it down, picking it up and putting it down, like in few minute increments. I probably would have been better off just reading it. But that was a point in my work where it was difficult to just read stuff. I was mostly relying on audio. So I would like to read Shadow of the Wind, and even though I liked the audiobook adaptation, to actually just read it and see if I kind of like retain what's going on more. Yeah, like I can see the hype, and I feel like if you like literary, like gothic horror, like just like spooky vibes, just kind of like, I guess, dark academia, I guess, like, yeah, this would be, I think this would fit the tone of dark academia. So next book I read was The Duke of Midnight by Elizabeth Hoyt. I forget what number this is in this series. It's like book 5 or 6. But we are following the third figure of the Ghost of St. Giles. The Ghost of St. Giles is like this Regency Batman, Robin Hood, vigilante character, and it turns out that there's multiple of them. There were 3 of them who kind of all donned the same costume to do this. This is also a very steamy romance, well, moderately steamy romance series. I feel like book 4 has by far been the most steamy, and then like some of the earlier ones were more steamy, and this one, it's like we're more than halfway through by the time we actually get some payoff. So thankfully I really enjoy the rest of the story of what all's going on. But yeah, when we get to the steamy stuff, it's pretty steamy. But yeah, so we're following the third figure of the Ghost of St. Giles, and then the lady is Artemis, who is a lady's maid. She's from like a formerly noble family that has like fallen out of favor. Like her father lost all their money or something and committed suicide, and then her brother got convicted of madness and is imprisoned in Bedlam, the cousin. Hold on. So she is serving as a lady's maid to her cousin. And there's some very interesting conversations in there about these unfortunate female relations. We have a reintroduction to the character of Bathilda Picklewood, who is like the unmarried aunt of another character that we've met earlier in the series. And in that first book, she's like one of the only fat characters in the entire series. She's like an older woman, unmarried, and she was kind of portrayed as like this absolute frivolous airhead. And in this book, she's got some amazing character development. She has some great speeches about like, you know, we as women with no money and no immediate family to take care of us, we are at the mercy of the male family members who choose to take us in, and we have to be very, very careful of our reputations, because like we have nothing. We have nothing to bargain with, and we have to be very, very careful. But also like not woe is us. It's more like we have a roof over our heads. We have food, we have clothing, we have company. We could do a lot worse, and that is worth protecting. That is worth being mindful of. But I also love that, like, when Bathilda figures out that, like, this lord has been ruining the reputation of this lady, she goes to him and she's like, what you do in your own home is not just your business. What it does affects your sister. It affects, you know, your other family. It affects your sister. Like, you as the person with power have this responsibility to consider what your actions do to the less powerful around you. So yeah, I really enjoyed just like the development of this woman who was like this comedic throwaway in an earlier book. But anyway, whatever our dude's name is, third Ghost of St. Giles. What's his name? I didn't write it down. And Artemis. There's a lot of symbolism of her with the Greek myth or Roman myth figure of Artemis the Huntress. It's a fascinating clash of personalities because, like, our male, of course, like, has this brutality that has rarely met his match, but then she has this wildness and this determination that makes her bold and brave. And they also both really know the feeling of having to wear a mask to hide who they really are in greater society. Hold on, there is an amazing quote in here from Artemis. Stand by. Yeah, now that this book series has started really picking up with strong female characters, there are some great lines in here. So here's a great line where she's talking about trying to get the Lord to help her with her brother, who's named Apollo and Artemis. How fitting. If she wasn't fighting for Apollo, she might have conceded the field to him, for this was blackmail and hardly very fair. But then again, she was no gentleman, raised on the traditions of honor. She had been a lady, a person often deemed by men, such as he, to have not enough intelligence to understand complicated male concepts such as honor. And now? Now she was a woman hardened by the capriciousness of fate. This was her life. This was where the tides of fortune had landed her. She had no time or use for honor. Anyway, it was a fun time. Definitely we'll continue with the series. I peeked ahead at some of the synopses for future books, and at one point we do get a female vigilante character. So I'm excited to get to that point. So the next book I listened to the audiobook of Dear Senthuran by Akwaeke Emezi, and this is narrated by the author. This is their memoir, and it's written as letters to their various selves and to various important people in their life. Lots of trigger warnings for discussions of suicide and attempted suicide and suicide ideation. But there's also, I feel like, depending on what mindset you're in, there is something comforting in hearing someone talk about suicide and suicide ideation as like a constant lived reality, rather than like the super terrifying, awful time in my life that is now over and now I'm healed and I'm all better. And it's super terrible and I'm so glad to be past it, rather than someone who's like, no, suicide is like this constant thing. It is like every day. It's not necessarily a fight to be alive, but is like, you know, the idea of dying, the idea of not wanting to be alive is not this super scary, overwhelming thing. It is a part of how they move through the world. And I do feel like there could be something very comforting in hearing someone just talk about navigating it from that perspective, as like not something that is so scary and so terrible and so tragic, but just like the way that some people move through the world. I don't know if I'm really describing that right. There's a lot of really interesting discussions in here, because they talk a lot about their mental health and their life and the process of writing their first published book, which was Freshwater, which is a fiction, because that book is very much based on their experience as a non-binary person, as a person with multiple selves, a person who doesn't quite identify as human, a person who identifies with godhood within their multiple selves, and like that's a very interesting conversation. I think my favorite conversation in here is Emezi saying, I love attention. I want to be famous. I want people to worship me. I want all of this. And I feel like how suitable that I have found fame and attention and success because I fucking want it. And I want it unashamedly. And I feel like that's really refreshing, because so often we see people who, you know, are glad to be successful, but they are really uncomfortable with the visibility and the fame and the, you know, the culture shift that comes with all of that. And I think it's really refreshing to hear from somebody who actually wants that, actually wants to be very visible and to have lots of people, you know, praising their work and everything. And I guess like very much challenging this notion that in order to be grateful, you must also be humble and self-deprecating. And why? Why not be grateful and also be like, I fucking love all the shit I have. Fuck yeah, give me more. Why? And like, I don't mean give me more as in like make me a billionaire and make me hoard all these resources. No, like more just like I wanted to be famous, and I find being famous rewarding, and there doesn't need to be any false humility around it. So yeah, this is a fucking fabulous, interesting person. This is the third of their books I've read so far. I still need to read Death of Vivek Oji, and I'm really, really looking forward to Bitter, that's coming out sometime next year. It is a prequel to Pet, and it, I assume, follows Pet's mother, whose name is Bitter. So I'm looking forward to reading more from this fascinating author. The next book I finished was Cazadora by Romina Garber. This is the sequel to Lobizona that I read last year. This is a YA fantasy that is based on Argentine folklore, specifically surrounding brujas, witches, and lobizones, which are werewolves. And our main character, Manuela, Manu, she is in a world where traditionally women are witches and men are werewolves, lobizones. She is a lobizona. She's a female werewolf, but she's also not trans or non-binary. So there's just a lot in here. There's a lot in the story about challenging social norms, especially like gendered social norms. There's great found family, found friendship in here. Oh, also in the setup of Lobizona, Manu is originally living as an undocumented immigrant in Florida. So there's there's also things about her family in the magical world. So she's like undocumented on multiple fronts. So there's a lot in here. The big theme in this book is this tension of, does she continue like fighting society subversively and putting her friends at risk, or maybe she should just like give herself up and save her friends and save her family? I did feel like a little bit of like emotional whiplash of like how much she like goes back and forth in all these decisions, but I also feel like that's kind of what a teenager would be doing in this situation. I do think there are some good moments of these teenagers, these kids, just being like, I don't know what the fuck to do. I don't know what the fuck to do. Instead of just like making terrible decisions and trying to be unapologetic about it, or like pretending like they know what they're doing. Like there's definitely moments where they're like, I don't know. I don't know what to do. Let's do this because all ideas seem equally terrible. So that felt a little bit refreshing. But yeah, there's Manu's dealing with a lot of like, how much does she fight for her right to exist, and how much is she like tired of like putting people around her at risk, and she just wants safety. She wants to find safety, whatever the fuck that looks like. We learn a lot more about the magical side of this society, and the way that the very rigid social structures of the society are starting to crumble from the inside. So that was really entertaining to watch. Anyway, yeah, this is a really solid YA fantasy story, and I totally look forward to reading more books in the series. The series is called The Wolves of No World. So, hooray. So the next book I read or listened to was The Order of Time by Carlo Rovelli, and it's narrated by Benedict Cumberbatch, which I didn't realize when I checked it out, and then I start hearing this delightful voice. So thank you, Benedict, for keeping me company while I felt my brain dribble out my ears because it was not ready for the themes of this book. So this is a book about the concept of time, especially from like a quantum physics perspective. It's a nonfiction. So yeah, it was just kind of not really blew my mind because a lot of the stuff he's talking about makes sense. And then the rest of it is like Einstein level quantum physics shit that I'm gonna need to reread this. I feel like I need to read more about astrophysics and quantum physics to really be prepared for this. But just like, you know, what is time? What is it? What is it? Is it a wave? Is it a particle? Like, how do you actually measure time? And basically, like, time is the measure of change relative to something. You know, time on Earth is dictated by gravity, and, like, gravity at the point, like, you know, altitude. Two synchronized watches at different altitudes will run at different speeds. Because, yeah, if you think about it, the stuff that's at a higher altitude, if you think about the Earth's rotation, it's moving faster. So, yeah, it would... But, like, that only exists if those clocks are together and then separated for a time and then come back together. If they never come back together, if they are never compared to each other, then that difference in time doesn't really exist. I mean, I don't know if you can see just, like, how many tabs I've got in here. It was very interesting. I'm glad to have read it. I would like to read more stuff from this guy, but also, like, man, quantum physics is wild. It's wild. Ugh. Okay. Okay, two more. All right, so the next book I finished was The Carpet Makers by Andreas Eschbach. That name there. And it is translated by Doral Jensen. Also, given this thing about forward by Orson Scott Card, I have to be really annoyed because when you, like, type this book into Goodreads, when you have, like, the list before you actually click into the book, it initially says by Orson Scott Card, and then you'll start to see, like, the actual author's name in there. But, like, and then, like, so that feels like a formatting error that is misleading. But also, like, in the forward, it's basically Orson Scott Card saying, I am the reason that you are able to read this book in English. Be thankful. It's like the forward is, like, not really talking much about, like, the author or the work. It's like, it is a little bit like, oh, it's great. I started reading it and it's great. But it's mostly, like, Scott Card tooting his own horn, being like, look at me using my influence to help this German writer find an English-speaking audience. Be so thankful for me. And maybe I'm reading into it a little bit, but I was annoyed. Moving on to the actual story. So this is a epic science fiction where each of the chapters reads like a short story, but they're all like these connected short stories. And it follows a world. We start on a planet where we have these carpet makers. And the carpet makers, it is a person who is trained to be a carpet maker, and they make the carpet out of strands of the hair of their female family members. And it basically takes them an entire lifetime to weave one carpet. I have the question, why what was there to stop the male family members from growing their hair long? Like, why does it have to be the female family members? That's a question. Just a lot of, like, gender binary stuff going on. But, I mean, it's part of it. When was this published? Published 1995, English translation 2005. So, not too old, but not very recent either. Okay, so it takes their entire lifetime to weave a carpet. And then they sell the carpet, and all the money they get from that basically funds the entire lifespan of their son. So it's this weird, not quite like indentured servitude, but this weird, like, it's this very interesting economic model. And the carpets are collected and sent to the emperor's palace. But then we learn, well, the emperor's been overthrown. I think we learned that pretty early on. And then the people from the empire, the fallen empire, who come to the planet and find these carpet makers are like, wait, I've been to the emperor's palace. There's no carpets there. But, you know, you're sending hundreds, if not thousands, of carpets out every year, and you've been doing that for like thousands of years. Where the fuck are these carpets going? What the fuck is going on? So that starts this kind of mystery unravel. Like, it's not like an investigation, but the course of the book is discovering what happened to the empire at large. How did the culture of making these carpets happen in the first place? Where are all of these carpets going? Because they're getting loaded on ships and they're going somewhere. Yeah. Yeah, there were definitely some parts where again, like, each chapter feels like a contained short story. I think this book started as a short story or a few short stories. So sometimes it can kind of meander a bit and you're like, what does this have to do with the carpet makers? What does this have to do with the original planet that we were on? But it all does all kind of come together at the end. And it was, yeah, it's very interesting. I'm very much reminded of, like, if you think about the greater lore of Star Wars, like, not just the movies, but also, like, all the TV shows and all the novels and everything, and just, like, how vast that galaxy, that universe is. And again, like, it's kind of slow, and it's kind of like you're getting pieces of the story, and you're slowly weaving everything all together. Ha, see what I totally did there on purpose. Yep, great. But yeah, so anyway, this was something I picked up because I've been trying to read more translated fiction, and definitely if I can find translated fantasy and science fiction where I can find it. Yeah, this one was interesting. Again, like, I think, like, a solid 3.5 stars, because again, like, sometimes various parts of the story felt kind of meandering, and I was kind of just like, what does this have to do with everything? But, like, I never felt reluctant to pick it up. I never felt fully bored. I just sometimes felt like, not like lost, but just like, yeah, just like, are we gonna circle back to whatever the central theme is? But yeah, I thought it was quite interesting, and I am glad to have read it. Only been filming for an hour. It's no big deal. Actually, it's not so bad. I mean, I used to do reviews of like 12 to 14 books and have like 2 hours of footage. So I'm actually doing not so bad. Great. Okay. Last book. The last book I listened to was the audiobook of Slay by Brittany Morris, narrated by Kiersey Clemons. I really enjoyed this one. This is it's a young adult. Yeah, it's a young adult. I wouldn't call this middle grade. This is young adult. This is a story about our protagonist. You know me. I can't remember names for shit. So she is a young black woman. She's 17. And she's like one of like 3 black kids at her mostly white school. And in secret, she is one of the game developers for this online MMORPG called Slay, that is basically a celebration of black culture from across the globe. And it's supposed to be black players only. And she created this game in response to dealing with a lot of really vitriolic racism when she tried to play the other popular MMORPG at the time, which could be a stand-in for World of Warcraft, or what are the ones that are popular with the kiddos now? Fortnite? One of those. And then something happens, and word gets out to the masses, meaning to the white people, that this game exists, where presumably only black people are allowed to create accounts. So that is, and so then our teenager, who remains anonymous for most of the book in terms of like not revealing that she's the creator, she has to deal with the fallout of all of that. Yeah, there's a lot of really interesting themes that are touched on in here, and what is it? It's not that like you're hammered over the head with the themes, but the themes are discussed very clearly, which I think is okay because this is targeted at a younger audience. But there's some moments where I'm like, I didn't really need that explained to me, but I think that's because this book is targeted at someone who's like half my age and therefore has half of my life experience. But I think like it deals with some interesting themes. It deals with like navigating internalized racism. There's a point where, you know, she's talking about how, you know, there's a point where she's talking about like the idea of being pro-black and being anti-white are not the same thing. They have some overlap, but they are distinct things, and being one is not to be the other. And there's a lot of discussion about like the exhaustion of always being the minority in the room, the exhaustion of tone policing and code switching, and having to deal with the microaggressions that still occur from well-meaning white people. Because of course she's got white friends who, you know, try to be woke and try to be well-meaning and try to be considerate, but at some point they're gonna step in it, and they're gonna like ask questions that they really should have Googled, or they're going to want her to do a bunch of emotional labor in educating them or whatever. So yeah, I found this story navigated portraying those experiences in a very clear and realistic manner. There's, in terms of like the game and, you know, white people being up in arms about it, there's like this thing about they didn't want into their world until they found out about it. And it explores this idea that just because something is not for you or is not for everyone is not the same as it being discrimination. You know, the concepts of power and accessibility are huge factors in drawing the line of whether something that is exclusionary is discriminatory. You know, and you definitely see the argument in the book that parallels our world, that like white people have plenty of online MMORPGs, plenty of online places that feel safe and accessible to them, and in this story, black players have one. And all people have a right to safety and dignity and understanding, and until everyone knows how to create and enforce that, marginalized people are going to need to carve out their exclusionary spaces where they can catch a fucking break. And I think this book does a good job of presenting the sides of the debate of whether something that is exclusionary based on race is discriminatory. I just forgot how I started that sentence. Fuck. So I think it does a good job of not telling you whether it is or isn't discriminatory, but it portrays a good variety of both arguments, so you can draw your own conclusion. I mean, I feel like the conclusion is clear based on some of the stuff I just said, but I do feel like the story doesn't draw a hard conclusion for you. Also, I love that this line about what our character loves about the world that she has created in Slay. This is a world where your black is not my black, and your weird is not my weird, and your beautiful is not my beautiful, and that's okay. So, yeah. I really like this. I think it totally deserves all of the hype that it got when it came out, and I hope that people don't forget about it, and people still decide, and people who were formerly interested in it and haven't read it, like, yeah, this is a good one. This is a good one to pick up. And I did really enjoy the audiobook narration. Yeah, that was a nice one to round out the month. So that was, how many books? 13 books. Hooray. Okay, anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you've made it all the way to the end, you are a champ. I hope you have a good rest of your day. I encourage you to go out into the world and be curious. I will have my social media and other places where you can find me linked in the description box below, and I will catch you folks in my next video. Bye!